Thank you. I might take this standing up, I think. No difficult brief from Rosie. She just said, go on and be funny. Always the worst thing anyone can ever tell you before you get onto a stage. I have been hanging out with dead people now for the last 18 months. There are a lot of them, is the first thing I can report. 80 billion at the last count. So rather difficult to the winnowing process. But luckily, the people who are remembered are a slightly smaller group of people. I think the old line was that people may be undeservedly forgotten, but nobody is undeservedly remembered. And it's two of those people I'm going to talk to tonight. Two Londoners, two men who were born rather close together, who lived most of their lives in London, within a few miles of each other, but who never met. And the rather tendentious conclusion I'm going to draw from this, just to put you in the mood, is that they remain unbelievably relevant to the world we live in now, despite having died over 180 years ago. So can I get my first slide up? So these two men, my son, my 12-year-old, when I said I was doing a talk about people, he said, "Oh, can I see, Dad?" So I showed him the slides, and it turned out that he just looked at them and said, "Why are you going to talk about two guys dressed in brown?" I wasn't able really to come up with a brilliant killer response to that, except to say that although they look rather like they're men of their age, men of the late 18th century, they are in fact, going back to to William's talk, these two men are extremists. They are William Blake on the left and Jeremy Bentham on the right. They were both revolutionaries. They were both, I think, visionaries, and they were both complete and utter nutters. And my hope tonight is I can convince you of both those propositions. Can I get the first of the next slide up, which is just Jeremy Bentham. This is, of course, the most famous thing. Bentham, the philosopher of happiness, the greatest, this idea, which is a very revolutionary idea that he had, which was that somehow, if you were able to make things work for most of the people, the greatest good to the greatest number of people is the measure of right and wrong. And he was, Bentham, he was an obsessive. He was a man who didn't mix much. He didn't like other people terribly. Reminds you of the great Dr. Johnson line, you know, he didn't like, he liked people, one or two in particular, but the generality he despised. Bentham just didn't like people. He liked to work. He worked unbelievably hard, 20 pages every day of his life. There are, as we speak, in the archive in University College, 5 million manuscript pages, half of which have never even been published. So that's the first thing to remember about Bentham. He didn't get out much. And he believed that he had solved really the fundamental problem of existence, which was he had the vision really that there was injustice, that this injustice was built into the system, and all he had to do is to get up very, very early in the morning and apply his own sort of rules, this rule, the most important one, and you would be completely transform all the laws of the land. So another bit of Bentham, please, just to... This is radical, this is still radical. All punishment is mischief, all punishment is in itself evil. That's still, I would say, in the light of the Bulger case, in the light of Debbie's fantastic story about her mother, still something that most of us have not taken on board. The next slide. Every law is an infraction of liberty. This, at the end of the 18th century, was mind-blowing. He was seen as a dangerous radical. Bentham, unbelievably, was against capital punishment. He was against corporal punishment. He was in favor of women's rights. He's one of the very first animal rights activists. He was against the punishment of homosexuals. The modern liberalism, as we understand it, was given its kind of legal framework by Jeremy Bentham, and of course this made him a celebrity internationally and a complete nobody at home. He stayed in his room in Westminster writing his 20 pages a day, and was roundly ignored by most of the people around him, which was fine by him. Next, please. Right. Now, Blake, down the road, completely different take on the universe. Also, he was born the son of Draper, He learnt early on, his father decided not to send him to school because Blake was born with strong opinions. There were opinions that he didn't change for anybody. It meant he was a hopeless tradesman, and his father just despaired, didn't even bother sending him to school because he could see that William was not going to learn anything at school. Instead, William taught himself Greek, Latin, the Romance languages. He educated himself and invented his own system. But he was extraordinary. This quote, I think, for the 60s generation, this became one of the great quotes by which many of them tried to live their lives. The next, please. Yes, they're fantastic. Blake showing the consumer society. I want. Next slide. Sooner murder an infant in its cradle than nurse unacted desires. Yes, go for it, William. No messing around. He didn't attempt. Bentham brilliantly had this thing called felicific calculus. He was an Enlightenment scientist, Bentham. If only we got up harder, work harder, we can figure out the heart of all. We can solve all human problems. Blake really went route one. Just don't stop people doing things. Next, please. Yes, the ghost of a flea, still one of the most haunting images in the Old Tate Gallery. I mean, Blake's incredible imagination. He was at ease with Blake. He was at ease. Obviously, everybody knows, I think, the story about him seeing angels in the trees at Peckham Rye when he was just 8 years old. He lived his sort of visionary world that he lived in was it was every day. His son Robert, who died, used to visit him regularly. And one of the conversations he had with his son led to the invention of an extraordinary new process, which was instead of etching into wax, he painted with varnish onto the copper plate. Totally transformed. It was called relief etching. Anyone else would have patented it and made a fortune. Blake simply, he was a hopeless businessman. He never met any of his deadlines. He didn't like his clients. He didn't like his patrons. He fell out with all of them. And he worked away in his room, producing extraordinary visionary images like this. Next, please. Yeah, again, you're getting the theme now. Another one. Marvellous, yes, that's Europe in the middle, supported by Africa and the Americas. I mean, again, he was a scandal. He as you'll see in a moment, he wasn't successful in any of the things he attempted during his lifetime. Next, please. Yeah, this inner wife, I would desire what in whores is always found, the lineaments of gratified desire. So, now, the major difference between these two men is that Blake was unbelievably happily married. Next slide, please. This is Catherine Blake. She was a long-suffering woman. They never had any money. Sometimes she would serve, there was no food, she would just put an empty plate in front of William as a sort of mute reminder of the fact that there was nothing to eat. He, at various times, not wanting to nurse his unacted desires, he tried to invite another woman to join the marriage, which she wasn't very keen on. There's no evidence that actually happened, but they did spend a lot of time sitting in the garden naked, with him reading large chunks of Paradise Lost to her. But it was an extraordinarily happy marriage. 45 years of marriage, they only spent a fortnight apart. And one of the lovely things about the Blake's marriage is that when Blake died, of course, singing on his deathbed, singing of angels, she died 4 years later, and she said, I must go, Mr. Blake is calling from me from the next room. It's a very lovely image. Bentham never married. He didn't really have any of the equipment for marriage. He wasn't good at small talk. If you went for dinner with Bentham, he would print a list of the conversational topics beforehand and get very cross if you didn't stick to them. Also, his domestic arrangements were eccentric, even for an Englishman. He loved animals. Lots of English people love animals, as we know. But, I mean, these animals lived with him. He slept often with a pig. In his bed. As a fellow pig keeper, it's not something I've ever tried. He had names for his objects. He had 2 walking sticks, Dapple and Dobbin, and he also had mice that lived in his office that ate many of the manuscript pages that he was working on. Anyway, the most mad. Next slide, please. and again, lovely bit of, yes, this is great. This is the first and only review of the only show that Blake had in London. Blake, not famous at all in his lifetime. Now, of course, you know, very famous, the Tiger, the most anthologized poem of all time. Next, please. Right, yes. The thing we all know about Bentham, and I'm aware I'm running out of time, is that he was genuinely mad, and one of his big ideas was that when he died, he had such a horror of the idea of corpses and waste. It just seemed to him a ridiculously illogical idea for people to be buried in the ground. He actually wrote to London County Council saying, could he have permission to embalm, as it were, they should use, instead of having street lamps, that they should use, people should be allowed to embalm their relatives and varnish them so they were weatherproof and have them as decorations down their driveways. The letter, as far as I know, was never answered, but Bentham actually went through with his plan, and you probably know he's still sitting in, as he suggests here, in, next slide please, he's still sitting in University College London, which the legend is that he's wheeled out from time to time for meetings. Now, he last had his underpants changed in 1939, where his clothes were found to be moth-eaten, but there's still his original clothes. Underneath is just a skeleton. He had his friend take all his flesh away and keep all his soft organs, his soft tissue in glass jars, but that's not his real head. His real head, just to show you the extent of the madness, it all went really horribly wrong. Next slide, please. That is Bentham's real head, and those two eyes are two glass eyes that he carried around in his pocket for the 6 months before his death. The next to him is Blake's death mask, but I suspect that there is something in the difference between the way these two men met their maker which separates them. But there was also a common bond. They were both people who liberated themselves from centuries of oppression. They were both free-thinking, free spirits. Although we laugh at Bentham, as I say, the basis of modern liberalism is in his work. And as for Blake, I think we all know that his poetry remains, I think, right at the very top. After sort of a century of neglect, he has become one of the great, truly great and revolutionary voices in English poetry. And I think that's taking me almost to the end of my 15 minutes. The last word, I think, has to go to Blake. I hope in a funny kind of way. As far as philosophy goes, my favourite all-time philosophy payoff line is W.H. Auden's, who said, you know, we are here to look after, on earth, to look after others. What the others are here for, I have no idea. Then the last line I'll give to Blake, which I think it would sum up his philosophy, and indeed much of the philosophy. Brian, last slide. It is the end of the marriage of heaven and hell, this fantastic idea that going back to Williams, that heaven and hell, we need both of them. You know, one is not good and the other bad. These two things, you cannot do anything as a human being without both. But that is it, but everything that lives is holy. You don't, I think, have to be religious to applaud that emotion. Thank you.